Technogayanism. Incredible subjects. How are you today, Khannea?
A little groggy. It has been a difficult week. I had a flu last week, and it still lingers.
I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you're feeling better. Hope you're feeling better soon. Now, some people on the outside, when they look at transhumanism, they have a lot of colorful ideas about what techno-optimism is. Some of those ideas are a little bit grandiose, maybe even a little bit paranoid. I would imagine the outside observer doesn't immediately associate an ecological mindset with a techno-futurist mindset. Tell us a little bit about TechnoGaianism. How do you address those concerns from confused outsider?
This like the interplay between science fiction, where you try to extrapolate certain trends and certain expectations about the future, the hopeful future, the future where things turn out well. William Gibson had an example in his timeline and his stories that consistently all the horses go extinct. We try to avoid that. We also would like to have tigers and all that sort of thing. But there seems to be a potential for incredible death and incredible suffering in the animal kingdom and also in humanity itself the next 50 to 150 years. I hopefully would be alive during that time. I consider myself blessed that I am in a fairly safe and sedate country, so my chances are maybe above average. But it would suck if I could see the world, if I would see the world revert to some kind of Dante's Inferno. And the potential for that is there. Now, that's just hopeful that it doesn't completely go to shit. But ideally, we would have a more build up stuff more than we had, like restore tropical jungles, eventually sort of garden the world. And if you introduce mega scale engineering, especially the work done by Isaac Arthur in his videos, and you literally construct a better world, a sort of a managed world, I think that the potential of humanity to introduce those technologies on all levels, from David Pearce's re-engineering genetics to creating protected zones to even creating whole ecologies in space. I think the potential for that is enormous in the next few centuries.
Yes, and I do feel that we have reason, as you've intimated here, to be optimistic about solving these problems. But there are very real problems, and they're real problems that date from the beginning of the industrial era. We can describe climate change as a result of industrial era missteps, but we can describe missteps that we might be beginning to commit if we're not extremely careful with 21st century technologies. What do you think is the bigger concern in terms of existential risk? Climate change or other risks associated with technofuturism, like advanced algorithms or troubling developments in the life sciences along the lines of a doomsday bioweapon?
I think that there's always potential for doomsday bioweapons, but there's not much you can do about that, because even within 20 years, even a garage scientist can do that. So that is out of our purview. But my concern is most right now in nuclear weapons. That is almost a mundane concern, not even a transhumanist or high-tech concern. But I think knowing that even a very modest nuclear exchange between, say, India and Pakistan would have major consequences for crop cycles all over the world, the disruptive potential for some local clueless idiots to thrust us in global catastrophe is there already. So that's my concern in the next 10, 20 years. I think that, and this is not a popular perspective for most Americans, I think that taking all in account in climate change is that the potential for people at the top to take control very radically and very quickly in the next 10 or 20 years is significant. So I always argue that we are going for a climate autocracy worldwide very soon, with binding resolutions and maybe even police action against transgressors. But if you look at the damage that is going to occur, even for the assets of very rich billionaires, sooner or later these people wake up.
Mm, mm, mm. I did. Some of your comments bring to mind an interview that I organized on the Steel Archer show just a few days ago about algocracy, a more advanced algorithm-run form of governance that would tend to be rather dramatically different from the present-day nation states. And that included our friend in Istanbul, Iray Özgüral, and some other panelists of note. And we talked about this idea of nuclear weaponry becoming potentially being controlled by a black box technology, being controlled by the algocracy. You mentioned that this is a chief concern of yours. Do you think that advanced algorithms can mitigate these risks, or do you think that it increases that instability?
The track record for automated systems, algorithms, feedback cycles, thinking machines, if you so insist, is not very good. If we look at what happened in the economic sector, the banking sector, you see that what's being created in those sophisticated decision-making systems is it's drone warfare, it's exploiting millisecond transactions. It is making as much money at the expense of other people as right now as possible. I would include, by the way, is the way social media is used, which is the attention economy is predatory. Mm. I don't think I'm very optimistic in that regard. And just extrapolate certain very rich elements or political movements in the world, say Saudi Wahhabism, they are not rejecting AI at this time. If they pump a few billion or $1 trillion, whatever they have available in this topic, and you end up with a Wahhabi value-centric AI, we could be in a damn lot of trouble. And I think
that is a troubling prospect.
The potential for large investors, other than Elon Musk, who we all trust, but to an extent, but large-scale investors, say Bezos. I don't trust Bezos. I consider Bezos, by any standard, a moral human being. And if this guy starts to invest heavily in space and heavily in AI, if his values embed in those algorithms, that could be nasty. Yeah.
Mm. You mentioned the social media and also an automation juggernaut like Amazon. So someone like Zuckerberg, someone like Bezos, when addressing some of these concerns, they would say, we're getting there, right? Mark Zuckerberg, in talking about the Cambridge Analytica, which is pretty much dovetails very well with his organization, but he says, we're going to fix these things. We have new rollouts, new algorithms that's going to make this better. Jeff Bezos says, yes, I've destroyed many, many millions of jobs and it concentrated an incredible amount of wealth. But look, I have what's approaching a full automation operation that could bring things down to being close to a free good. Do you feel that we can rely on this kind of trajectory, or do we need to shake up and break up these kind of institutions?
Well, in that regard, I'm very optimistic about Andrew Yang. I think that Andrew Yang is completely right. The introduction of a basic income is, I think, inescapable. Either you have inescapable, or you will have Hong Kong riots worldwide within the coming 10 years. It's going to be a hot 10 years. But there's a whole lot of fear and prejudice towards the idea of giving away free money. But that seems pretty self-explanatory. I have a minor amount of faith in what Jeff Bezos is saying. His arguments are solid, but I really don't trust his greed. And if I look at Mark Zuckerberg, I quote a scene from the last Batman with the Joker, where the Joker says, I know squealy people. I know people that do stuff behind the scenes, and that's a squealer. And I think that Zuckerberg, I see his facial expressions and I read facial expressions. And I think the guy is gluttonous.
Yes, yes. Well, his relationship to other outfits that have been rather harmful into social media. It's he wants it to pass our notice, but everybody knows this. The Cambridge Analyticas, the Palantirs of the world, and a dozen more besides. They're all close friends of Facebook, and that's yes.
Yeah.
And so his saying, "Oh, we're just going to fix this problem. We're going to fix this Russia problem by just a bunch of new algorithms." That's a very, very reductive way of looking at all of those problems.
The problem with all that agencies, that acronyms that surround Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and all the other social media, because Google is being courted heavily as well. They all are. The problem is that it is not just one, and you don't know often what you're dealing with. You might be dealing with a certain agency, and secretly that agency might be to a degree corrupted by Mossad or something like that, or by Koch money or whatever. You do not know always where you're dealing with. Also, it is like the several agencies or actors in this field are extremely contradictory. I got a whiff of that when I was in Washington, D.C. in 2011. And I get the impression that the United States is a whole lot of people trying to manage a whole lot of very wild horses that all want to go different, disparate directions. I think that Bezos has a sort of a plan of the future, and he has some expectations, and he thinks that he bets in long-term strategies. And I think that Mark Zuckerberg's completely drunk with power, and he only exists in the now. But that's intuition. Insofar that's worth anything. But I don't trust him. I don't trust Mark Zuckerberg at all. Completely not. Yeah.
Yes. So we're talking a little bit about nation-state intrigues and cyber wars, and also to some degree the relationship to corporations and even corporate espionage there. Do you think that this is something that is going to get out of hand, or is this a kind of proxy warfare that is not as violent as what we've seen in the past?
That's hard to say.
Hold that thought for a second, Khannea. I have to plug in, and
Okay.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can still hear you.
Okay.
Electricity.
If the sound becomes unreasonable, please let me know. Sorry, we were talking about espionage.
I have been in contact with the spouse or partner of Arjen Kamphuis. Arjen Kamphuis, by the way, the IT professional, security professional that recently disappeared in a fjord in Norway, but let's not get into that. His partner was Annie Machon. Annie Machon was very familiar because she defected from MI6. I looked into her eyes, and she looked very sincere in what she said. And as far as she characterized it, as far as I remember it from a few years ago, she gave me the distinct impression that MI6 is the arm, the functional arm for the executive arm for business, for the old boys network, the big money. There's no government feedback. It's all businesses, all companies, all corporate. So they do the bidding of big money completely.
You mentioned an important organizer from your country who has gone missing. Would you care to comment further on that?
Arjen Kamphuis I consider him a good friend. Our ideology was completely in sync. He was also quite cynical of how the world is developing and how politics is developing. I recently had a presentation of a guy, just worth mentioning. What is his name? I'll get back to you in a second. Arjen Kamphuis was an IT professional, security professional. He worked in Amsterdam and he worked in Frankfurt. He had servers running for WikiLeaks, for the Pirate Party. He was somewhat associated with the Pirate Party, but he did a lot of work in that field. I attended a presentation of him with a guy in a wheelchair. I'm pretty bad with names. That was an NSA defector from several years ago. Very interesting guy. And they all say the same thing. The system we have is completely corrupt. Now, Arjen Kamphuis was such a critical voice in this regard, and he was so active. For instance, as far as I know, he organized the servers for WikiLeaks in Switzerland, so no jurisdiction would get at them. He was pretty annoying for America, and I think traveling to the United States was pretty much out of the question in his later years. He disappeared. He went canoeing in a fjord in Norway, and poof, he was gone. His phone switched on somewhere in Germany. His phone turned up and it switched on somewhere in Denmark or in Germany, which is puzzling. And there's a lot of talk right now that he was, disappeared by this or that agency or organization, literally. And that could have been black rendition and torture. But maybe I'm being paranoid here. Who knows? I don't think so.
Well, these sort of things have been known to happen. And I think it's a reasonable supposition anytime an organizer with this sort of background, it's a horror. It's a horror that these kind of things happen. It's a horror looking at the United States. A moment ago I asked you if these cyber wars are tamer, but there's plenty of nefarious behavior, and the United States is not a tame organization in any light in terms of its role on the world stage. Every person that I know in this campaign, almost every person, is running on a ticket to reduce that harm, and even all basically many Democrats, not all, not most, but many, are running to reduce that Pentagon bloat and also that aggressive behavior on the world stage. It's a complicated affair. What do you think? What do you think the United States could be doing differently, in practical terms, in this sort of thing?
Well, again, you assume that the United States is something that still can make decisions. I don't think that's the case. I'm hopefully cynical in that regard. I think that the United States is pretty much ending. I won't invoke stuff like infrastructure or state debt or weapon proliferation or the insane disparity or climate change or the difference between flyover states and coastal states or intellectuals versus clueless people. It's everything together, including the military-industrial complex, including completely out of control law enforcement. The list goes on and on and on. They see so much Rome-style instability in the United States. The system has become so fragile that even a minor disruption of logistical lines of food support or electricity is bound to cause major catastrophic upheaval, mass violence. I do not wish this on anyone, but I am currently helping several transgender friends in leaving the United States as quickly as possible. And with a good reason, because these people are spiritually dying where they are.
Yes. My friend who I interviewed, who's also running a political campaign of a more lighthearted kind, perhaps, but he's a Chicano, and he's gender fluid, and I worry about him in a lot of ways along these regards as well. The United States has many problems. We're going backwards in many of these things, and it's not acceptable. It's really not acceptable.
You have to bear in mind that there are two problems. When I was in Washington, D.C., for what it's worth, because my exposure was fairly superficial, but when I was in Washington, D.C., I noticed that a lot of people are, like, they don't even have a lot of money. They have a budget of, let's say, a few $100,000 annually, or they do something and they take their own share and they live their luxurious lives, and everybody is in on it. It is one giant scam. So on the one hand, the amount of money going into the system, which is completely artificial money, of course, is so bloated and so out of control, inflated. And on the other hand, an upper strata of powerful people is grabbing that money and turning it into some kind of political or technological leverage at an incredibly fast pace that there's no way of knowing where this is going. And these people will not, under any circumstances, step away from their privilege. They have mouths to feed, they have yachts to pay off, they have apartments and luxurious compounds to pay off, they have airstrips in New Zealand that require maintenance, whatever you dare call it. The upper layer is so bloated and so big and so entitled, they will never willingly step away from this. They might even do something like declare national state of emergency or contrive some kind of disaster, maybe an EMP. I get more paranoid by the second. But the other problem is that a large number of Americans are well aware of the demographic shift. And America is becoming more of a mixed race situation, and the old money, and especially the WASPy kind of conservative people that maybe regret that slavery was cancelled. Those people don't want that, and they right now. I think what you see right now is a mass secretive alt-righty conspiracy between big money and alt-right and angry white people that they, under no circumstances will they allow America to Obamify. To use
and when people are angry at Facebook and all of these satellite organizations, you know, when you look at the pure demographics and what would happen if we had an actual functioning democracy in the last election versus what actually happened in the 2016 election, what you're saying about this white power base and its willingness to manipulate to maintain that power is very poignant, and it's extremely upsetting. Now, we were talking a moment ago about some rather apocalyptic notions. The United States is a dying empire. You and I are futurists. Let's game that out a little bit. I mentioned I did a talk on algocracy. I've done some discussions on what this networked world does in the instance of such a disruption. So the United States is collapsing. Does that lead to a one world government? Let's play around with it a little bit.
This is chaos. The prediction in this field is so difficult. To make any meaningful statement is premature. But the most entertaining statement right now is, I refer back to the novel Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, where he describes an almost comically balkanized society. It's an old novel, but it is so spot on. He describes something like Bitcoin taking over. He describes literally everything getting privatized to the point that there is almost no meaningful central government anymore, except some enclaves here and there. He makes a joke out of it, but his vision all the more ridiculous. And bear in mind that he is a libertarian, so he has a sort of a sexual fetish for all that freedom. But bear in mind that this is happening. Sorry?
I think of whenever I think of libertarians, I think of an unhealthy fixation with money in some way or another.
I call them propertarians. Yeah.
Yes. I do regard myself as a libertarian, but of a different kind.
I regard myself definitely as a far left libertarian, the original kind.
So do I. Yes. My feeling is that whatever we see in terms of changes to nation states, they could be very troubling on a continental level, but I think in the longer term, we are not moving towards a world that is. We are in a networked world. A good analogy is fintech. The United States is also facing a potential economic crisis of a similar kind. But my feeling is that is not going to be like the crash of 1929 with breadlines and things, because we just do not live in the same economic landscape. There's an awful lot of things that could be prevailed upon, and you can just say it's a bit of a hand wave, fintech. But it is a very different world.
Well, the problem is fragility. And Jamai Cassio made some, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Jamai Cassio? He made some good statements a few years back about fragility of logistical supply lines. If you make something hyper efficient, it automatically becomes more fragile. And even minor supplies, Dmitry Orlov did a lot of that, made a lot of good statements on that. He describes how countries collapse, and then he paints the pretext for the collapse in the Soviet Union, Union, and he describes that the Soviet Union had it fairly good because they still had robust systems in place. They had good family structures. They were ethnically not that diverse. They had no weapons, etc. So the Soviet Union was more or less collapse-proof because they always were in a sort of semi-collapse state. America has become so affluent and so dependent on all these supply lines, and the systems and the people have become so fragile that it is truly terrifying what might happen. Yeah, this could get like historically World War II bad, Civil War bad, but I don't know. I have no idea. What I do bear mentioning is that people should step away as quickly as possible from the fiction of money. In the 1930s, money was still a sort of tied down concept. Since the oil shock and disaffecting gold from dollars in the 1970s, I think, there were all these crazy laws that you couldn't own gold or whatever. They were all cancelled. The gold became just a commodity for technological purposes, and money became a sort of a Zeppelin or a Hindenburg kind of construct. That is, it cannot do anything but fail. There's absolutely no other outcome than it failing, and that means globally. But what then? There's no idea what comes after this. A guy who does a lot of presentations, I tried mentioning him before. What's his name? He did a lot, Luijendijk, Joris Luijendijk. I attended the presentation of him last Saturday. He is extremely good in his banking analysis. He describes the self-sustaining psychopathy, the complete disregard for consequences in the banking sector. That was endemic in 2008. That was completely not removed. Nobody went to jail except for like 2 or 3 people. And now it's way worse. So the next crisis, without a shadow of a doubt, is going to be worse. We're going to be less politically equipped with it to deal with it, especially if Trump is president. It's going to be the word is clusterfuck. And what can I project in this regard? How can I make any meaningful prediction? That's folly. And I only know that it's terrifying. Pretty much it's like falling into a bathtub with either giant octopuses or sharks or acid or battery acid, or you don't know what you're going to end up in.
And, in thinking about these things, we can say when we see right libertarian titans of industry, so to speak, consolidating so many resources, consolidating so much influence in terms of advanced algorithms and automation and so forth. I'm reminded of a television show that I was a fan of just a short few years ago called Continuum, a Canadian program, and I won't go long-winded on that, but on this television program, in this universe, there is effectively a full automation private sector algocracy that is taken over in the collapse of other entities. And it doesn't seem so far-fetched to imagine that happening in certain parts of the world. We kind of maybe see that happening to some degree in slow motion. How do we as left libertarians, as believers in the new sphere, as believers in the human race, how do we combat that?
I think a good trajectory right now is I am very hopeful about U.S. elections. I think that the DNC is forced to deal with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Biden is not going to cut it. He's going to fall away from this very quickly. And then they're left with either 1 percentile candidates or 20-30 percentile candidates, 2 of them. There might be some fluctuation, but I don't see someone like, what's her name? Kamala go up because she did too much harm in LA. Andrew Yang might go up a little because his plans remain good. In a perfect world, if I were a sort of magic, could cast some spells, I think that Bernie Sanders as president and Andrew Yang as vice president, ready to take over the reins when Sanders falls away for some reason. That would be perfect solution. Yeah.
Yes, that would be an interesting ticket. That would be an interesting ticket.
It would not be very libertarian.
Yes. It seems that the DNC has resisted even reformers of this kind, but they have rather settled on Liz Warren as the least bad option because the public is clamoring. 80% of people are demanding some form of single payer or Medicare for all type program. We have a failing healthcare system in the United States by the standards of the developed world. And I lived in your country for a brief one semester, and so I have some recollections of the ways in which you have a more, in some ways, a far more high functioning civil society than we have here in the United States on a number of dimensions. But yes, we should hope that we will see true progress. And I don't think that Andrew Yang, even as a presidential candidate, is such a dark horse. I think that he's nearly as likely to be the nominee as Liz Warren as things start to chop out. But I don't know.
I only can see analysis is that the United States population, and I'm not talking about a few deluded people somewhere, the majority in raw numbers, and aside from the sickening electoral system, favor far left liberal policies across the board, reducing Pentagon bloat, changing the election system, doing something about that gerrymandering, or what they call it, gerrymandering, reducing police violence, cannabis, for-profit prisons, the healthcare system, money in politics, and there's no doubt what the American people want. But as we know from academic studies, there is no translation with what the American people want and what gets implemented.
Yes.
But you never know that. So Bernie Sanders might get elected, and then he might start the hard work of mobilizing all Americans with surgical legislation to wake them up and to unionize them and to get them in a million people marches and protest against the Pentagon and protest against this and that. That's his ticket. That's his way to go. And it's going to be a really nasty
I mean, there's
fight.
only so much that these voter suppression and insidious bad actors in the two-party system, and particularly the Republican Party, there's only so much they can do to subvert a popular will. And in a certain sense, this President Trump is a manifestation of that subversion, propping up a sham populist to assuage a populist, an increasingly left populist polity, it again comes to this idea of the United States. Outside watchdog agencies look at the United States and say, you don't really have a functioning democracy there. We need to end these kind of dirty tricks with respect to voter suppression and this whole constellation of concerns. It's largely around moneyed special interests.
But if you're a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and you have a bunch of kids and you have a bunch of houses, and you look at your bills every month, and your bills are through the roof. You have to pay for this house and a new lawn in that house, and your ex-wife wants money, and your current wife, and your mistress, and you have like 6 kids who all go to a prestigious university, and you have a vacation, and you have an expense account. You may have a drug habit. How the hell do those people step away from their power? And that's, I think, the problem. Too many Marie Antoinettes.
Yes, and there's so many of them. There's so many of them. It's not just Charles Koch. It's Charles Koch and a standing army of scumbags. That's half of Washington, D.C.
Look at the income chart for the United States. So you color all like low income is white, and like as more red it gets, the higher the income. You see a solid red blot over Washington D.C. that's incomparable to everything else. There's some major red in New York and some parts of LA, but the rest is almost lily white with a tiny bit of rose. That basically means that all the big money and all the big money makers, so all the grabbers, are in that particular nest of vipers.
Yes, very much so.
So what do we do? What do we do as transhumanists? What do we do as techno-progressives? Pray. My friend Amanda Stoel from TechnoGaianism is a lot more opportunistic. She believes in that we can do things with symbolic gestures or with principled gestures. I call myself a little bit bad cop in that regard, and she's the good cop in this part. She believes in the goodness of people, and I believe in having results. And yeah, I think that we should be very pragmatic in the next. The transhuman community should be very pragmatic in the next decade. Yeah.
But the United States is a bad actor. The Pentagon itself is the #1 polluter in history to this day. But the United States is not the only entity in existence. There's only so much evil that it can do. I mentioned my running mate. She and I worked on a series of initiatives in working with the Estonian government, Estonia. Yes. As we know, they have an advanced e-governance and digitalization framework in that country, well beyond what exists in other countries. And pardon me. And we also are beginning to see she is actually working with a government-run incubator there at this very moment in Tallinn to advance a specific set of programs.
I'm doing an interview. Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry. Excuse me. No, go on.
Yes. To advance a specific set of programs through this government-run incubator around personalized medicine, senolytics, basically an initiative to have their public health service declare aging a disease and shift the agenda of their operation accordingly.
That's an example. That's a good example.
Do you have insights into longevity movements of this kind? How do you feel about this sort of thing? There's a lot of ways that we're moving in the right direction, I feel.
Yes, that is hopeful. Two things. I was, can I use the word intimately? Let's say closely involved in Aubrey de Grey for several years. No, I zip up. I don't say anything in this regard. But I know Aubrey very well close up. And I occasionally email him with questions, and I got a good sense of what he is about. I starting to get the feeling, and again, intuition means nothing in this world, but I starting to get the feeling that we're not very far from actual tangible life extension treatments. They may not do as much in the early stages. We know the story about metformin and human growth hormone, and now we can at some level reverse several years of aging. Now, if we progress that, especially with the new emergent technologies of automated systems doing medical research, the potential for that accelerating very fast is enormous. So we could see massive strides forward in life extension. Now, the question here is, which is important for every one of your listeners, is life extension affordable under medical insurance? Most people here will be having medical insurance, and at some point it has to be, it has to have merit for the society, for the state, for the government, for the financial system, for the accounting balance in society, to determine if life extension is going to make sense. As you know, old people in their later years, in the later months even, consume an enormous amount of societal resources. If we can end that, we could save trillions, many trillions on a yearly basis globally. The amount of societal loss. You shouldn't call it loss because you are taking care of people, but let's say that no economical growth potential in these markets of people in geriatric care or dying people or oncology, or even if we can end that by cutting off aging and reversing it to a large degree, if that becomes societally profitable or it makes sense, you can see a big change. And the biggest change here is once people get it in their head that their actions have tangible and rather serious consequences for themselves, everything changes. Once the typical nobody or whatever person without any deep reflective thought starts superficially realizing that he might be alive in the year 2100, 2100 suddenly has personal consequences for him or her. And I noticed that the more I started accepting in the early 2000s, accepting the possibility of life extension, the more I started thinking about long-term consequences of policies, of what you say and what you do. I was rather short-term oriented 20 years ago, but as I became more transhumanist inclined, I started thinking about, holy shit, if I do this or if I do that horrible thing, that might bite me in the ass 20 years from now. And this is all the more true for politicians, for captains of industry, for oil executives. My message to all executives, if life extension becomes a possibility, or if even a likely possibility, you should be scared, because a life sentence might last a long time. And as an oil executive, I do not want to end up in, like, say, 2.5 centuries in prison.
Yes, that's a very interesting observation. Yes. So my feeling about life extension, we talked about the costs, and there's definitely near-term concerns of this kind, and not fixes. But my feeling is that if we're looking at the kind of initiative being fully implemented that we described in passing in this context of Estonia and this incubator, that is a full oversight of citizens, a constant monitoring of their health, and also preventative measures, as opposed to that basically hospice situation that we have now, that end of life care situation that we have now, being the expenditure. We could be getting life extension for everyone at maybe a fraction of the cost of what we are spending today. Do you think that's a reasonable assessment?
I am personally completely convinced that that's the case. I think that the inertia in the system is insurmountable almost, but if we could overcome that inertia and completely approach it from a completely different angle, the amount of efficiency, cleaning up all the clutter, getting rid of all the nonsense, all the bloat and pork, I think that we could run society working 2 days a week, living in complete and utter comfort and luxury, and with full health care, with more standard of living for nearly everyone or everyone, more standard of living, more luxury, more comfort. Maybe not as much consumption. Maybe we eat a little less meat. Maybe we go on flying holidays or airplane holidays. But if you have a house of 150 square meters and you have solar and you have electricity, and you live a comfortable life in a very well-organized and ergonomic inner city, and you bike to a cafe, you have like an espresso for 3 hours every day, you have a chat with good friends, the amount of stress which you can discard, the sheer comfort, it is almost a sort of Venus Project, Jacques Fresco kind of future, which you then start painting, and it clearly ties into my personal lifestyle and TechnoGaianism. I am retired and I take things very easily, and I take things very, very, very relaxed. I loathe stress, and I just want to have a comfortable life, and I wish that everyone has my standard of life. It may not be very affluent, but the social interaction and the sheer pleasantry of meeting people and being nice to people is something I can tell a good gospel about. Yeah.
We've spoken about basic income. We've spoken about full automation and human development and satisfaction that might derive from that. What some people say that there's too many institutional barriers to truly implementing this. That we need people like Peter Thiel, madcap anarcho-capitalists, chopping things up and forcing us to reevaluate the roles of these institutions. How do you see us getting to fully automated luxury communism as a society? Maybe in terms of time, maybe in terms of strategy. I think I'm at a loss, so maybe you can help me.
I think that you should demarcate benefit of borders. So in a country like Netherlands, you can create a fairly isolated petri dish societally, where you can experiment with new models. And you see that in all smaller countries worldwide. The bigger the country is, it becomes more inertia. It becomes a more powerful country, but it also becomes riddled with inertia. And I think that you should create those petri dishes, even at the city level. Take away as much power from central governments as you can, organize humanistic value systems on a local level, or even Christian value system on a local level, where you care about people, where you can watch people in the eye, where you can avoid the pitfalls of isolation, which in turn create psychopathy, literally. If you can take people away from that sickening affluenza-driven society, you can expose them like to normal social contact. And that's, I think, the way to do it. If you create appeal for a social society, in that you are social, and then the socialism is almost inescapable. That's the lesson I have from the Nordic countries, Sweden and Iceland and Germany, and to a degree my country. You look the poor people in the face, or the rich people look me as a poor person in the face, and so they have to contend with me and my humanity. And I think that in many countries like Russia and China, that's completely lost, and in America, it's completely gone. And that's the third world model. That is the third world model. That is the third world model of insular elites in gated compounds with security guards that have absolutely no empathy for the rest of society. The Elysium model. The Elysium model. Sorry.
No. Do you think that in continuing that line of thought, do you think that Singularity.net, Ben Goertzel, do you see players on the field now who have what it takes to move us into an anarcho-transhumanist, a humane anarcho-transhumanist civilization?
I think it's go for the low-hanging fruit as quickly as possible. I must mention that I have a very curious report with Ben Goertzel, dating back from my Second Life years, I believe. But I occasionally email him and talk to him, and we get along wonderfully. He's a really, really nice guy. But he is, I think, he is a good model in America for this, because he's so internationalized. He's all over the place, all over the globe. But another example is David Pearce, who takes all this ethical stuff back to the basic level. He's like a devout vegan, and he's. I have good hopes for these people. That transhumanists with a heart, like Philippa van Nedervelde and Julio Prisco, and if you then mention someone like Peter Thiel, dark romance, what is it? He wants to roll back women's rights and female voting.
Dark enlightenment, yes.
Yeah, dark enlightenment. He wants to roll back democracy. He wants to create a sort of a feudal corporate monarchy.
Yes.
But
he's also an ardent life extensionist. He's not wholly. He's not wholly villainous in every point.
Yeah, Hitler liked dogs too. But no. A virus might bear at 0.50 when I hear people like that talk.
Yes. It sets my teeth on edge. Even people that don't have.
This is evil. This is outright evil. What he says and what he proclaims is complete and utter, undoubtable evil. The fact that he gives a lot of money to Sensor and all the other life extension organizations and a lot of to space research, that is a little superficial panacea. Same goes for Bezos.
I was having this conversation with Ira Ozkarol also. Now, this man is effectively, he's known by his people in his organization as the shadow president for his coordinating in the 2000. He was basically one of the earliest architects of the Trump campaign, and his data influence and various operations are the reason that we have this fat lunatic for president.
I could come up with much less flattering terms.
Yes, and I think you would be on the mark. Yes, yes, it's true. $1 million for such a person to give $1 million to Sens or this or that. It's a drop. It's a drop in the bucket compared to their the disruption that they've done, and not in a good way.
Yeah. Sorry for Peter Thiel and all the positive things some people say about him. It's not enough.
Yes. No. And but that kind of actor that is the biggest player on the board. You know, whatever the stuff about kind of saying jerky stuff. You know,
we have Elon Musk. We have Elon Musk. Elon Musk is
right
on our side.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are they coordinate. And Elon Musk has donated to Republicans in the past. That's come out that they're part of the same operation. You know, it's just a good cop, bad cop.
Oh my God.
I mean, Elon Musk is head and shoulders above Peter Thiel on most of these things, but you know, that's a good example. Musk, Thiel, Bezos, these guys are the foundation of what this thing that I mentioned, this basically this techno-fascist operation that completely supplants nation states.
Has long since supplanted nation states. Definitely.
But so you mentioned a 200-year prison term for a corporate eco-terrorist. It is a good thing in the world. Whatever we do to hasten life extension, we have to be realistic about who the players on the board are and how we do that.
My biggest beefs are definitely my biggest focus points are definitely getting off this planet and getting accountable infrastructure in space, accountable people investing in space. So that has to mean governments for now. A good mix of private investment and but the sooner we have space-based solar, the sooner we are out of this mess. That's one, and life extension is the second.
Yes. So you would say that that near-Earth development and getting off-world should be a higher priority than life extension in terms of the existential risk and the pace of techno progress?
If I am self-serving and tickling myself, I say life extension because I want to live real long. I like life, or like certain aspects of life.
But in thinking of those 7 billion others.
But if I think of the 7 billion others and I think of the bigger picture, you have to really get industry going offline as quickly as possible. That's definitely a higher priority. But we can do both. What are we talking about? We can easily do both.
Yeah, it is easy. It's so easy to fall into either or propositions.
Nonsense, of course. We can do everything. We can also give basic incomes, and we also can give everyone free net and ponies. It's all possible.
It's something that I worked on fairly recently. It's not a high-profile initiative, but I worked with a Russian engineer and some of his associates on a prospectus for a space elevator, which was a partial space elevator, because the materials science is not advanced enough to build a full space elevator of this kind. The nanomaterials that would be
space elevator is an old story. If you look at the way Isaac Arthur describes how we can get in space. Space elevator is enormous industrial object. It is like, if you measure it, how big it is.
The whole to China. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you put like, how does as Isaac Arthur in his videos call it? There is a system where you can literally lift stuff off planet without having a space elevator and launch enormous quantities of material in space. However, that's an investment we cannot conceive of at this time. But if there's someone optimistic in this regard, it's Isaac Arthur.
Yes, and I was lucky enough to interview Isaac Arthur. We talked mostly about metaverse notions. I wanted to talk about near Earth industrialization, but we decided to talk about things where we'd be maybe a little more on an even footing. Because you know, I don't know if that was precisely the driver, but we decided to go in a different direction. But yes, the getting off world, but yeah, and also there's no concentrated entity that has $1 quadrillion to spend on such an undertaking. So you know, it's all being spent on planned obsolescence of garbage. There's
military expenditures. If we halved the military in the South, if we halved the budget of the military, we would have long since had cities on the moon.
No, I do believe that. This has come up in conversation and talking about the NASA, the original moonshot, which was basically $1 trillion publicity stunt with no real industrial aims around it. And many technologies that are allowing us to have this conversation and do interesting things did derive from those initiatives.
Yeah, but I don't believe in that theory that we have spin-off research and fallout research. We would have had fallout research a lot. Of course, any conscious effort or any serious effort generates all kinds of positive side effects. But the sheer growth in energy consumption, the sheer reduction in pollution, the sheer ability for geoengineering, materials we can get from near-Earth asteroids. Near-Earth asteroids are like the central area, the central core of most near-Earth asteroids. It's like nothing but heavy metals or rare earth minerals. If we can get like a fraction of that to Earth, we solve so much problems. If we like tenfold the availability of near-Earth elements, the conditions we can improve, and say the Congo is just mind-boggling. We could make the Earth and everyone on the Earth significantly richer, with no loss, with no major losers in this game, no zero-sum bullshit. And that's space industry development. And that's my emphasis for the past 20, 30 years.
I'm not a big fan of interjecting alternate histories into these conversations, but I will say that in that year around 1960, when they were conceiving of starting to conceive of this moonshot over the course of the Cold War, I imagine there were alternate plans, like building something that would have had more industrial function than just $1 trillion publicity stunt. And so we could very well be in the position that you described had the United States had a little more insight into its own behavior.
Have you ever heard of Gerald K. O'Neill and the High Frontier?
Maybe not. Tell me about it.
Well, he is the guy that describes space habitats in glorious detail. And maybe the designs he made are a little outdated. We can have much better designs. But he describes literally completely functional pathway for technology in the 1970s, how to get into space, how to colonize and mine the moon, how to colonize near-Earth asteroids, and within an appreciable amount of time, let's say 1 generation, 30 years, have space habitats. And the thing is with those space habitats and with industrial capacity in orbit or Lagrange point orbit on Earth, you could have 1 space habitat at moment X, and a few years later you would have 2, and then 4, and then 8. You can have a geometric growth in the amount of space habitats in our lifetime. The ideas are insane. There are several books which I can't remember the title of that clearly describe the process and how that wealth trickles down back to Earth by simple economics fallout. And the amount of people you can have in space could be in 1.5 century, even a century, 2 centuries more than the people you have on Earth. You could have easily 10, 20, 30 billions of people. You can make 6,000. If you take all the asteroid material, you can easily make several thousand Earth surfaces in garish, including lawns and everything, and including people barbecuing, garish luxury, living in garish luxury in habitat, in space habitats. That was with 1970 technology. And that was, he testified in front of Congress, and they said, well, this sounds really good. And then nobody did a thing about it. I might even say that oil interests might have buried this. I don't know. It's so bewildering that we didn't go that way. Yeah, alternative histories. Don't get me started. The frustration.
And I think the biggest part of that really does come down to, I think of the television show. Really, my favorite television show, a comedy television show, Silicon Valley, where the main character. He has a job offer to go and work for an Instagram type company, making the little dog faces, virtual mustache gag. And he says, I'm not going to work on this. This is a stupid product. But this just whimsy and a lack of real focus or lack of real useful work product derives from the marketplace.
Human creativity, the destruction of human creativity and passion on animated dog faces. Yeah. That's
a lot of Silicon Valley is products that don't really do that much, except people find them mildly amusing.
There's a scene in Margin Call, and this is the banking sector as well. There's a scene in the movie Margin Call where a guy does mental arithmetic literally with his head, describing economic consequences. He's sitting on the porch in his house somewhere in New York, and he's describing to another banker about what he could do with bridges and engineering, what kind of money he saved if he would have stayed in engineering instead of working in the banking sector and built bridges. How much life comfort he could have created just creating more easy roads to travel on. And that wasn't done. All that money went into another direction, into a sort of a banking or in military or in political apparatuses. And that engineering mindset that the United States had in the 1950s, that didn't pan out, it didn't continue. Bridges are now collapsing. And not just in the United States, everywhere, this short-termism, this pension thinking, it sickens me.
You mentioned something that stands somewhat in contrast to that a few moments ago, a theory, and I don't precisely recall the word that you used to describe the theory, but it seemed to me that what you were saying was basically if in 1950 the U.S. military-industrial complex had ceased to exist, we might still have the same level of technological development that we have today. This is a very sort of Kurzweilian idea. This was something that you were intimating, that the idea that it was said, I think it was what was said in the context of NASA. We have all of these derivative technologies from NASA, but that would have happened anyway. It just might have happened in another part of the world.
But there are certain key choices you can make in industry, and of course it ties in with the story of alternative timelines, etc., and alternative histories. But there are key choices you can make, and if you look closely, you can actually see which choices you have to make. Getting cars was short-term very profitable. It was very good for society. Long-term consequences were not that good, and we knew it in the 1960s that the whole car culture was destructive, eventually going to be very destructive. We did it anyway. Had major benefits for the lifestyle of people, but now we are stuck with the consequences. We're stuck painted in a corner with all the petrochemical industries. There is still enormous investments going on in that direction. But if we went solar, what was the president? Carter? He wanted to install solar on the roof of the White House. Reagan demonstratively, angrily had it dismantled and discarded as scrap metal. If you just suspect the forces and the corporate interests behind that, you know what's at play. You know what the benefactors are. You know what the stakeholders are. If we are able to make choices like Julius Caesar would make them for the greater good and not just for special interest or minority rule. Just he says, if we just make the sacrifice on this particular pathway, things will be good. And we both know, and most of the viewers know, which roads to go. Life extension has been mentioned, space has been mentioned, fundamental changes in how society works, the political system, what do you call it?
Algocracy.
Algocracy, yeah, tongue twister. But like the Pirate Party has similar ideas of like different ways to count votes, or you can give your vote to a specialist on certain issues. There are all these genius ideas on how to do things better, but try and implement them. It's daunting, but there's hope. There's a lot of good ideas. There's no lack of really good ideas, and people that want to implement them, and people that want to vote for them. And it's time for special interests to start realizing that the guillotines are actually not a theoretical construct. It might get ugly if they fuck up. If the elites fuck up now, they're going to die. Literally, they're going to get lynched. And it may be bold words on my account, and I might be targeted by drones next week or something like that for saying this kind of stuff. But this is going to happen. There is this guy saying that the pitchforks are coming. We are so rich, we are too rich. What's the guy's name? Literally, he wrote an article, the pitchforks are coming. I would say the guillotines are coming, and with technology advancing, it might be wood chippers. Literally, you might get revolution, and you might get a lot of very corrupt people dying, and it could happen very quickly. I'm talking 10 years or less.
Yes. And
that's the destructive pathway, and I don't want that because it's going to be hell. But
no. And, it brings to mind a campaign promise that I made recently in the course of this campaign, which is that I'm going to have 10,000 people by the year 2022 in our organization, the United States Transhumanist Party. Now, why am I saying this? Because we want to see these kind of anarcho-syndicalist outcomes happening without the rivers running red with blood. And maybe, of course, these wealthy individuals should get their comeuppance, but we don't want to see hundreds of millions of people dying in the wake of that. Now, one initiative that I've talked about with a few people, some of whom I've already mentioned in the course of this conversation, relating to getting that 10,000 number, is idea of working with the World Transhumanist Movement, working with other tech movements on the global scene. There's a lot of interest, and I think you and I at least once commented on at the same time on an article of this kind about transnational blockchain identity, a blockchain passport, things of this kind. Do you see that as just a confection, or is that something that we can use to change our world?
I was loosely associated with the Pirate Party in the Netherlands for some time. I was befriended with one of the founders, I think, Samir, and it was an interesting time. But my skills are more like storytelling and communicating ideas and connecting people. I am technological, like not super technologically inclined. So if I understand the basic of Bitcoins, I understand the basics of blockchain, but I cannot yet see the full implications of blockchain. I can't make any major statements about that.
Yes. Well, I was thinking something more along the lines of the stunt, because the United States Transhumanist Party, it does allow for international partners to be voting. It's not such a high barrier of entry for people outside of the U.S. To vote in our elections, and that allows for the possibility of trying to build other institutions that are not so continent bound. And one kind of institution, even if it does not grow into a nation state type entity itself, could be playing upon people's interest. The concept of becoming a true worker for a one world government or a global algocracy is a maddening and daunting kind of notion. But inspiring people to some degree to intermediary steps therein, I don't think it's an impossibility at this juncture.
Are you still in contact with Zoltan Isvan?
Mm.
Are you still
Yes.
in contact? Yeah, I met him in like a year or 1.5 years ago in Amsterdam in Future Fest. So I generally compare him. For some reason, he strikes me as a sort of like a Clark Kent figure. I had some criticism of him, but from what I hear, you're doing God's work.
Well,
connecting people, especially as the Transhumanist Party. That is, I think you will catch a lot of criticism. I think.
Yeah.
Have you been compared to the Illuminati yet?
Yeah, but maybe once or thrice. Yeah. It's all in good fun, but I do think Zoltan has been critical of this primary. I don't know how closely you've been following it, but it's gotten a little heated between myself and another candidate. He feels it reflects poorly on the organization. This other candidate, in particular, is enjoys being intentionally provocative to no real end, and has also been rather disruptive in dealings with other organizations that are closely tied to the Transhumanist Party, like Humanity Plus. And Zoltan has gotten nervous, and as a result, I don't have quite the same ability to reach out to him that I had a few months ago. But maybe in a certain light, I have more of an ability to reach out to him now because I have 100 people that I could speak to who would get a message to him. May
I ask who that agent provocateur is? Who are you talking about?
Let me ask you this question: transhumanism. It's a term that some brings out the worst in some people. I think longevity is in some ways an easier sell on the world stage. What do you think about the nomenclature?
I wouldn't worry about that, and I can give you my expectation, and that's again just a gut feeling. I think that transhumanism is doomed. It will dissolve. 10 years from now, you will have a Jewish Orthodox transhumanism, and you will have a GOP Republican transhumanism, and you will have Mormon transhumanism. It will become, it will be absorbed by a whole bunch of much bigger ideological entities. And I think that 10 years from now, it will be just a mindset. There will be maybe a department of transhumanism and a few universities that do comparative transhumanist studies, but it is so broad a field with so many interpretations. I do not think it is defensible against mimetic absorption, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I wouldn't worry about that at all. I think you can.
It seems a good problem to have, because in that framework we probably moved a bit closer to a universal longevity escape velocity.
I would definitely prefer to see it in much more tangible terms. And Andrew Yang is an example, Jacques Fresco is an example, and there are a lot of examples. People that come with fairly delineated projects, approaches, things that are somewhat comprehensible to a university-educated person. Says we are going to make better houses, and we are going to make better infrastructures for cities, and we're going to do life extension so the tax burdens can lower. We're going to change the financial system for Bitcoins. Those are all very well manageable changes. And you can even see some implications of 2 or 3 changes at the same time. And I think that transhumanism is to get the hell away from all that pie in the sky, terrorism, we're going to make Dyson sphere talk. Just focus on the next 20, 30, 40 years. We can keep all that other stuff about going to the stars and whatever. We can keep that for later. Uploading we can keep for later, but focus on things that are somewhat comparable even to futurists. You can talk endlessly about angels on needles. You can talk endlessly about how the practicality will be of uploading. Nobody knows. This is too far over the imagination horizon. It becomes Alice in Wonderland. And stick to more tangible stuff we can do right now. And that ties into the utopian vision of what can we do to a world that is clearly broken. Focus on more tangible stuff. Focus on things we can do and we can explain to people. Nick Bostrom does a good job. He is philosophy, so he comes with a certain disclaimer of complexity, but like his tale of his dragon tyrant was just good. His ingenuity in coming up with a simulation argument was amazing. That is immediately insightful, and that kind of stuff. That has more or less direct implications for people. Or, yeah, I can actually think about it. People can like sit in a bar and discuss life extension now. It's just common. It's a common topic. But don't go too far off the deep end.
Yeah, that's true. But we all might be very well foisted into the deep end if we do come upon some techno singularitarian effects.
That may be the case, but we aren't there yet. That's what we have. Of course, the reality of technological change and disruption is real, but we have to deal with the here and now. And the here and now is convincing nitwits and Trump voters of what's in store. And if we can do that by means of a basic income, it's perfect.
You mentioned a few moments ago that you imagine transhumanism becoming an overlay on some socially conservative institutions. There would be a GOP
progressive or socialist or anything.
Yes. I did a religious panel that I organized also on the Steel Archer show with religious transhumanists of different backgrounds.
Lincoln,
and a gentleman who was the sorry?
Lincoln Cannon?
Yes.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. I know him from my Second Life days. He's such a sweet guy.
How did you know I was going to mention Lincoln Cannon before I did?
It's a bit of the token Christian transhumanist.
Yes. There were a couple of people in that panel, but Lincoln Cannon was the person I was going to mention, the founder of the Mormon Transhumanist Association. And he's a reasonable man by all accounts. He has a worldview that would be left-leaning and quite humane and reasonable. But in the context of the question of a sort of emerging culture, a mini theocracy, he seemed to be pretty excited about the idea of Christian transhumanists, Mormon and transhumanists, whomever, having a sort of breakaway, sort of low impact life extension theocracy that they would be participating in. I mean, that kind of stuff, like it's the kind of thing that makes me think that could work, and that could also make me think we need to really keep working on that space flipper. The space elevator concept.
Well, in that regard, I'm definitely what I would call a Pandorist. I would go for diversity. I want staunch psychopathic libertarians occupying the asteroid belt. I want socialists on Mercury defining the export of solar energy and concentrated beams. I want all kinds of cultures and all kinds of religions and all kinds of ideologies to scatter out into the solar system and to multiply and to mutate. And that's what I like, especially technology. For instance, the book from Bruce Sterling, Shaper Mechanoids, is that you have a solar system with like a genetically manipulating branch of humanity and a technological cybernetic branch of humanity. And then they have a Cold War. And that kind of schismatrix kind of stuff, that's, for me, is the most appealing As soon as you start realizing how much space there is out there, and how much stuff you can build, and how much human meaning you can generate, and the idea of having at least 6 or 7 competing branches of Mormonism, oh, as long as they don't like go for a full-on having multiple underage wives, I'm fine with it.
Mm-hmm. We talked about this idea before about going off world. We talked about it in the context of 20th century history. I've always wondered about this. You know, I mentioned that there could have been a competing project that $1 trillion that was spent on the moonshot might have gone into. The most a credible theory of that might have been something that would have led to a greater industrialization of the moon than we would see today, having occurred at this time.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
And
people have a blind spot about the moon. People never talk about the moon.
The technology was there in the 1970s. It's very simple. You start mining regolith. It's titanium and manganese. You oxidize it with with hydrogen under high temperature, so you end up with water and pure titanium, the best building material in the goddamn universe. You start building a linear accelerator on the equator of the moon, and you start launching mass metallic cubicles like this big with a linear accelerator. You capture it at Lagrange points 5 or 4, and you start building habitats. The story Gerald Key O'Neill outlined is extremely straightforward by now. Everyone should read that book as quickly as possible. And I know it is engineering-wise, it is a completely dated book, but the point is, it was possible in 1973. And it didn't happen. I'm perplexed at why it didn't happen. I did like role-playing games in the 1980s with O'Neill habitats.
You know, I'm also, you know, I think of the landscape of today. Industrialists, people like the Tesla organization, preoccupied with sending a man to Mars. And I think of it as that same kind of fallacious thinking, that same blind spot in the $1 trillion publicity stunt to no real end. Like, why aren't those people talking about building out the moon? It's so much closer.
No, the thing is, the problem is that the moon is in a gravity well. So if you want to go out and you look around for dollar signs, you immediately start looking at near-Earth asteroids, and those are actually pretty interesting. Those have a completely different composition than the moon. But if you want to go like an infinite or near infinite building materials, you start just mining the moon in massive strip mines. The moon inhabitants sure don't matter, or so sure wouldn't mind. You can go on and on and on mining the moon, but you have to start somewhere. I think that asteroids are actually a pretty good choice. But we can do both. We can do the asteroids, and we can do the moon. Why not?
Yeah, but I should still think that even with having to protect against those objects striking the moon so frequently, even that's still a smaller infrastructure project than going so much further and having to build much the same thing.
The amount of stuff that strikes the moon is not that dramatic. If you shield it with like a few meters of regolith powder or regolith concrete, you're pretty much safe. It's like small pebbles. And occasionally something bad will happen, but it happens on Earth as well. Whole countries get devastated by hurricanes. So it is risk management.
Yeah.
Of course, it is a very difficult environment to move. Of course, it is deadly. And of course, many people will die there. But there will be many volunteers that will clamor to go. And it is the new adventure. And you're building things that are going to last thousands of years. The first people that build a city on the moon, that city is going to be a tourist trap for a few thousand years, if you think about it.
Yeah. The first great wonder of the new world in the 21st century. Something.
I have a picture in my possession of Aubrey de Grey, when he without a beard. When he was really young, he was like unrecognizable. But it was Aubrey de Grey without a beard.
You mean he didn't have a beard when he was a baby?
No, he was like in his 20s or something like that. Adelaide convinced him to get a beard. So I joked around with him. If I would paint him as a sort of a diamond statue or a sort of a platinum statue standing in an O'Neill habitat, and a bunch of people complaining about that skater kid in his 20s that is playing around with his hoverboard or whatever. Why can't children or kids nowadays take an example of a great man like Aubrey de Grey? You see that statue with the beard and everything, not realizing that that little kid, that little runt standing there playing with his hoverboard, is Aubrey de Grey at age 500, who like meshes back into the simple life, smoking a joint, playing around with his friends, drinking a whiskey, and he doesn't want all that fame. He just reverts back to a low exposure life, unrecognizable by everyone. And I think that's his dream. He does life extension, and then he goes back. I don't know.
You know, it's been a recurring theme in a number of these talks that I've done in conversations with various people. This idea of artificial personhood. And so the USTP has all manner of charter documents, and in that are described a move towards the respect and protection of the civil rights of artificial persons at such a time when these become viable. And I take some exception to that because what's that?
Seems a bit premature, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's my feeling. I mean, we have artificial persons now that are disrupting elections. They're not really helping anybody. They have no qualia. And that problem is going to continue for quite some time before we have before we're contemplating this. I mean, but I do think uplifting is happening. You know, this Elon Musk has a monkey that can do things on a computer via Neuralase that I cannot do. That is effectively an uplifted creature. So there's maybe other avenues to things of this kind. But I wonder if you think that in moving so deep into the metaverse, in moving so deep into a world that has few limitations, you know, it's often said that parsimony, limitation, is an organizing principle of the human mind, that without it, a mind becomes disordered.
I agree. And let me hook into that immediately, because I have like a thing that is immediately relevant for today. You have a generation of men growing up right now that are completely lost and have no meaning or have no consistent theme on how to be. They get like offered a sort of a leitmotif or a role model from capitalism. It's like succeed, get a big car, get a house, get a really pretty wife, etc. Have lots of children, but that simply cannot be realized for the majority of them. So a very significant percentage of any culture, and that's actually true in Muslim society, or right now in China with all the excess males over females. And it's all happening also in Europe and in America. And you have like a real angry generation of young men that completely withdraw in gaming culture. And they have anti-feminist, angry, bitter, resentful feelings. They want their pretty blonde as well. And they want to have good sex, and they want to have that nice car, and they want it all. And media constantly bombards them with this. These kids are going to retreat in a fantasy reality. And the moment they get confronted with real women, like actual women and complex psychology of actual human beings, they will get incredibly frustrated and withdraw even more, because like for them, for that kind of guys, actual persons and actual intimate relationships and bonding is almost impossible. They're lost. So what I see is that these kids are going to come back from the cyber realm or the metaverse or whatever, and they will have persons with them. They will have highly sophisticated simulations of gaming sprites and gaming characters tailored for them. There's a Japanese word for them, waifu. They will come back with synthetic waifu. And I think that in terms of personhood, artificial personhood, that's where the great risks are. And they will demand rights for these completely functioning analog quasi-human psychologies. I don't believe that an octopus
It gets
is
to
going
my
to
question.
I don't believe that an octopus is going to have a meaningful interview at Letterman anytime soon or whatever late show. I think that uplifting generates alien results, but things that are meant to simulate the human, meant to simulate a sort of naive adolescent idea of sexuality, meant to simulate purposefully not making people lonely. Now, what you get love. And I mean, no, joy, you get joy. That is the character from Blade Runner 2047, 45, 49? Yeah, that's that
49,
imaginary
49.
character. That is that imaginary otaku character. And at some point, people will demand that their version of joy gets citizen rights.
Yeah.
That's
but
what
I mean,
becomes interesting.
to me, the interesting another interesting notion therein is are these so let's say that Gamergate and these incels, in a word, are an example of this a precursor to this global psychopathy that we could move into in this world. But if that world is down a rabbit hole, if it's in a substrate of little physical consequence, is it going to be okay? Is it going to be okay if everybody goes insane? But it's just it doesn't matter.
It's perceptive. It is perceptive. These horizons of insanity. Look at me. I am transitioned. I got like boobs. I got like the genital surgery. I got like at least 3 facial surgeries. By any definition that these people care to entertain, I'm completely bonkers insane. I got off my own. Like, who does such a thing? From their perspective, I'm certifiable. And from the perspective of who knows what kind of transhumanists, etc., we are all kind of alien, incomprehensible creatures. And as the world becomes ever more complex, that the distance between all these people becomes bigger, and the pathology becomes bigger, and the perceived pathology becomes bigger. So if I look at alt-right and I recognize angry Muslim kids in whole of the Middle East, that is almost identical. They just want to get laid. They just want to get luxuries. They want a nice car. They want a nice house. They want what everyone else seems to have, or in their imagination, everyone else, they think else. That is the delusion of capitalism. In the old days, all those people would perish. They would be sent off to war, some Fröhlicher Krieg, and they would die in the trenches. That has been the mechanism, the normal mechanism for dealing with these excess nobodies, what do you call, Douglas Adams would say, telephone polishers. The people have no real immediate applicable function in society. I don't begrudge them this fate because it's horrible being in their situation. But we have to contend with these people because these people have voting rights. You can't get rid of them.
Yeah.
And they will do stuff with technology we have no idea of. And it will be destructive to a degree when they shoot up another mass shooting. But it will also be, they create their own reality and they will definitely impose their reality on us.
Yeah, we need some sort of surveillance mechanism so that these people are not the ones who unleash the doomsday bioweapon that we discussed at the top of the talk.
That is definitely a possibility. I've been in my life, I've been very, very sad a few times. In 2015, I had a broken heart over a relationship, and I was dangerously nihilistic. And if I look back on that, like I could have, if I had bioweapons, I could have done horrible things. And the realization that I could have done nightmarish things out of complete broken heart, literally. I recognize that. I know that now. I see that. I can look back on it. That how damaged the human being can be under certain circumstances, and this is part of the human state. And let's keep a close eye. I wouldn't say surveillance because then we have prisons automatically, or maybe even worse. But yeah, we have to have a good look at what's happening there. And
we spoke,
yeah.
We spoke of a certain kind of techno-fatalism around an idea that even had the United States not been a major driver of network technology and digital technology in certain areas, that those things would have come about in a reasonable time frame as a matter of course. I do believe that may be true to some extent. This conversation came up in the context of population size. A thought experiment that I've engaged with a few people is that imagine that a small civilization with 7 million instead of 7 billion people had really reached an AI takeoff. Would they have an easier time taking care of all of their people in the course of that civil society uncertainty that would derive from that? And my thinking is probably yes. But it got me to thinking that that size itself is a feature, is the driver of these growth curves, and also that as we're entering a world where we will have artificial personalities, that growth curve will drive up sharply because we will just have so many more actors on the stage. Would you care to comment on any of that?
I think that generally more Brownian motion, like more chaos in the system, is sort of good. We shouldn't have one Skynet. If we are to have a Skynet, let's have 50, so that they compete all between themselves, and automatically that creates more margin for us glorified meat sacks. I think that if corporations compete amongst themselves, they automatically need human actors to do their bidding, either like as proxies or as workers or as freelancers. So I like power balance a lot. And I think that the population with 7 million is not much power balance when you unleash an AI. It's crowdsourced solutions are generally pretty good. And I have more faith in crowdsourced solution of 10 billion people than of 10 million people. So I prefer the bigger population as long as it's sustainable. But wisdom of the crowds is something real. And I think there is this guy who made a presentation about that, is like how much capacity of human cognition is wasted on bullshit. And if you create some kind of surplus space, let's say a few hours a week extra, and we start unleashing that human potential, it may be mostly cat videos, but YouTube, would you want to live in a world without all those YouTube videos? It may be crap, most of it, but there is some gems in between, and there's some creativity that's incredible. Facebook is a horror show, but would you want to live in a world without something like that? I wouldn't. We need sewers, so we need Facebook.
That's a good point.
These are all have some kind of venting or stress release or communication. It may evolve into something good yet. And as much as things compete with one another, and maybe that's the libertarian competing markets and capitalism in me. I like a lot of Brownian interaction. Then you can bet on more horses, so to speak.
Let's go back. Let's go back to ecology for a second and TechnoGaianism for a second. We've talked about some pretty sizable civil engineering and engineering feats, theoretical feats in the course of this conversation. A feat that has been described of a similar kind, and it's something that the engineering would be one thing. The bigger thing might be convincing a lot of people to do this. You're probably seeing where I might be going with this. What about a megalopolis housing all 7.5 billion people? From a TechnoGaianist perspective, do you think this is an intervention worth considering?
Housing people in single structures.
Everybody moving into a mega city the size of Texas, everybody in the world.
I don't think that we could have the. I think that we're like something like 50 years away from making that an engineering possibility. But no, I don't. I don't think that monocultures are very viable. No, this is a monoculture, and immediately when someone comes up with a monoculture, there's trouble. There's all the failure modes get reinforced and amplified. So no, I would, if we were to go for a model like that, I would say numerous different, like completely differently textured arcologies, plus now as much diversity as possible. That's the Pandarist in me. It instinctively rejects that.
I mean, I see that concern, but I think of a large nation state versus a small nation state. Does the larger nation state, as a rule, have more monocultures than the small nation state? They all seem to have diversities of their own. I would imagine such a thing as being a pretty wild and diverse place. But that could be a serious concern.
These things will happen. I agree that these things will happen. There will be at some point in the future, if we as a human species survive, literally one singleton structure with, if humans as a species or a biological entity survive, with literally billions of people clustered together in one thing. And hopefully it doesn't become something like the Borg, but I mean like a reinforced or an enforced monoculture. But if I try to visualize it, what would I want in a place like that? Like shopping malls? Well, that idea is dead. Lots of collective housing, large housing, communal housing, corridors. The things I find valuable in my life, which mostly parties right now. I go to a lot of parties. Yeah, are there parties there? And for everyone else, for instance, my friend Amanda would ask, are there gardens there? Like, can I have my my comfortable green TechnoGaianist environment there?
Well, I mean, my understanding is that it's basically just like New York, but a bit bigger. So everything that you would do in New York, maybe there is the odd person who's like, man, I really need to get out of New York and
I like cities
and go see this one particular kind of tree. But
I really like cities. That, mind you, that I would go live in Amsterdam straight away. I live in the center of The Hague right now, and I'm overjoyed with having a supermarket within walking distance. But it's not exactly healthy in all regards. Let's put that first and foremost. I love to, soon I lost my dog a few years ago. I'd love to have a dog again and take long walks to the parks here. And that's away from that city environment. So that's diversity. But I think that the needs of humans are so diverse and so subtle. I don't think we can fully see what we as a species need. The behavioral sync experiments. Do you know the behavioral sync experiment?
Maybe not. Please.
Well,
please
they put together rats in a sort of an idealized environment. So they create, like, food was readily available, places to defecate were readily available, the place was cleaned on a daily basis. There were all these bridges back and forth for nesting space. It was a rat utopia. What happened is the rats started breeding. They never filled the space to capacity. Like 50% or 70%, they filled it. And then something strange started happening. The rats had no what I call evolutionary impetus anymore. So in a few generations, which in a rat life is pretty quickly, the rats some rats became extremely aggressive and territorial and completely insane. And some rats were just grooming all day. And they called them the beautiful ones. And they were extremely stupid rats. They couldn't do the basic cognitive tests whatsoever. They could just sit around grooming themselves like Rachel Haywire all day. And they were completely useless genetic dead ends in that particular rat ecology. And I'm a little afraid if you try to artificially create, do you know the cities of Jack Fresco, how Jack Fresco designed them?
Yes. I know quite a bit about his work, yes.
Well, I would like that.
I did just interview some other technocrats from their parallel organization. So I would say I know a little bit more of the other side of the technocracy movement, but I am an admirer of his.
Yeah, I like monorails. I would definitely want monorails, and I would definitely like parks. But I would also want dilapidated buildings with squatters and parties and like wild acid parties and Goa parties there.
I mean, my thinking is that this may become a harm reduction necessary. You know, some percentage of some substantive percentage of the residents of the Bahamas have just died. This islands are 70% underwater. There's climate refugees of this kind.
I agree. Yeah, there might be the things like that.
I mean, I'm worried about the aesthetics and so forth, but I also just don't want to see a lot of people die.
Well, a good example of what you propose right now, a good example of what you just described, would be peach trees from the last Dread movie, right? That's a single, really high building, a mile high.
Yeah.
A whole lot of people in there, and I don't think they're all that happy.
Yeah. Well, the amount of land that would have to be reclaimed in the event of a tremendous climate shift or other catastrophe to sustain the world population at the level which most of us are accustomed to now. Not everybody. Some people want 100 acres and 500 horses or whatever, but I think that's a little decadent.
But you have a really good point there. You have a really good point there. The idea is that we fuck up this world to a degree that mega city kind of concentrated, highly unhealthy living, where lots of people die because they can't hack it, and a whole bunch of people just thrive because they're complete and utter bastards. So you get like really compressed, ideal, no, not ideal, but utterly necessary environments. I think I could survive there, but I wouldn't be happy there.
Yes. It still sounds quite a bit better than having to schlep off to Mars. I don't know.
I think Larry Niven had it right in his books, the Known Space books, where he said that Mars was going to be the completely, utterly disinteresting point in the solar system. Nobody gives a damn about Mars. It's a gravity well. It is oxidized. It has nothing but toxic chemicals in the soil. You can't grow potatoes there, no matter what everyone says. It is just a dump. I think that Mars will never be major settled. I don't think that even people will bother terraforming it. I think that Mars is boring. I think that the moon is much more interesting. Mars, definitely.
Yeah, I've always wondered why we haven't had the will. You know, and there was a period of that coincided with AI winters and other tech downturns of just a space age skepticism. You know, in the 1950s. In the 1950s, everybody believed that what would be effectively an artificial singleton was like 5 years away. They're like, in 5 years, we'll have a computer that just thinks like a person. And everybody's like, great.
But I guarantee you, we're there now. We are not like 20 years from human level intelligence left. It's around the corner.
But we don't have that. We don't have that cultural fascination with techno progress. That space age. Excitement that we had. We have something else. We have dystopian feelings. We have all manner of maybe less productive feelings. I don't know.
Sexual deviancies. I don't know. Yeah, you have a lot of white noise in the system. Yeah. Conspiracy thinking. I'm a little afraid that this complete and utter banality is cultivated.
Yes. Well, we've had so many interesting discussions here, but I don't want to eat up your entire day. Do you have
wonderful, but I'm getting slightly exhausted.
Yes. I need to get some food in my stomach. That much is true. It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful talking to you, Khannea. Do you have any other advice for me on the campaign trail? We did talk about that a little bit.
Transhumanist Party.
Yes.
After this interview, I should like get Kevlar because Rachel Haywire is going to be dangerous. But no, with Transhumanist Party, yeah, I don't think you would like the advice.
Okay. You can text it to me sometime.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Herding cats. Have you heard of that proverb?
Yeah, that's about right. The United States Transhumanist Party is about like herding cats. My platform was devised I'm running to the right of myself in a certain sense, with a mind to maybe appealing to that very broad base, that very broad spectrum of political philosophies encompassed in our organization. But yeah, it is a bit of a mess.
If you start succeeding as a transhumanist party, I warn you, you have seen what they have done to the Libertarian Party, right? There were people undressing themselves.
Oh, no, okay.
There were people on stage in America on the Libertarian Congress or whatever you dare call it. They were literally getting naked on stage. Yes. And people wearing cowboy pink stuff, and I don't know whatever they were doing. It was horrible. And imagine how easy it is to completely discredit a libertarian movement by two of those incidents.
Yeah.
Now, the moment transhumanism starts getting the limelight, the powers that will do exactly the same to you. You will all come across as a bunch of nutters.
Yeah, I mean, there is always a very real prospect of these in the United States as a COINTELPRO, these state-run operations to disrupt political clubs and entities, and I can see elements of that in what Rachel Haywire is doing. But obviously she's been around for a while, like, but there's.
No, I don't think so. No.
Yeah. No. I mean, she has whatever her pedigree is. She has that pedigree. But it is why I think that longevity, even just the longevity party, has in the long term might have a better chance of playing out the full string than the transhumanist party. Because we are so paranoid conspiracy and sci-fi fanatic adjacent, and in the United States particularly, that encompasses such a broad cross section of political philosophies. The person who would call himself a transhumanist,
and you exclude so much of the U.S. population by definition.
Well, I mean, my feeling is that those people are de facto almost overwhelmingly, to some high percentage. I couldn't, it'd be just silly to speculate, but almost that nobody, if a public health service in Estonia begins offering interventions of a kind that would be effectively creating a civilization of immortalists, there's no Faustian bargain that need to be engaged upon by any one of those people in accepting that. They just go to their doctor.
No. They did a study on life extension, and the defection rates were well over 50%. Defection rates is people in all over the world blankly refusing life extension treatments. I think that many of those would come around really quickly, but I would still be convinced that double-digit amounts of humans would say, "Hell no, I want to grow old and die."
I can't imagine that's a durable position. I imagine that would last for about 6 months. I imagine that's a moral panic or maybe a little longer than that, but a moral panic along the 6-month panic around test tube babies in the United States.
I don't agree with you. I think that a lot of people would say literally, no way, over my dead body, literally.
I think it would be about the percentage of people who are in the United States now who reject medical care. Christian Scientists. It's a small number of people. And in the long term, but I think that in the short term, you're right that it would be there would be people who would. But it's really not that hard of a sell if you're anybody who's been in poor health has been probably confronted with this notion that maybe if they had been able to do things a little differently, they might have. And that's it's not a terribly hard sell in talking to your doctor to be made to confront that reality
I
when it
have a
comes
friend.
to
I have a
yes.
friend, and she is a wonderfully intelligent girl.
Mm,
She dances real good. She's like real pretty, and she's definitely completely intelligent. She's completely sane, and
mhm,
she flat out, with complete and utter religious conviction,
mm,
says that she would literally fight tooth and nail to have something like life extension in the world.
mm. Does she live in the Netherlands also?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I know people that fit that bill very well. I'm related to some of them, but I just can't imagine that it's going to become an entrenched position that where the
I
half of the
hope you're
world becomes anti-life extensionist.
I hope you're
Um,
right. I do fear what I intuition. I think something like 20% of people will be what they call defecting life extension. They say no.
yeah, yeah. Well, like Charlie Strauss says in one, I guess his seminal work, um,
Accelerando?
Accelerando. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've read a bunch of his books, so I'm confusing. But he says, in paraphrasing here, you don't really need to worry about these bioluddites because in a generation they all die off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Or we put them in enclaves and we archive them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're there as a library reference material.
Yeah. I
Uh,
I I made I wrote a short story which is a crap story, but I made a joke is that death in Texas, and in the
mm,
story I wrote in a century from now in like 2113 or so. There is no death because the United Nations has decreed that everyone is backup, and you have to take enormous efforts to prove that you're sane and then emigrate to the asteroid belt, and there you can still die naturally or unnaturally. So there's no death,
I
and then
think Rachel
everyone.
Haywire should probably be banished to that substrate.
No, we should archive her as well. But I think and the other joke I made is taxes. Is that in the future you don't have taxes, but you have basic income. So there's
Mm,
no more death and no more taxes a century from now.
yes, it's a good joke, and it's also a good, pretty reasonable prospect.
I think
um,
I think this is
yeah.
very likely. I think that the amount of trauma, if someone says, I lived 120 years, I'm going to now like unwind and I'm going to like gradually wind it down and die. The amount of trauma that person inflicts on their fellow human beings is unacceptable at some point. So I
Mm.
think that the state will intervene and say, no, we are going to unleash happiness algorithms in your mind and you're going to last for at least 50 more years.
Mm, mm,
There's no escaping utopia, Mister.
mm. I interviewed the secretary of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, Pavel Ilan, yesterday, and
Yes.
one observation that we came up with was that there are relatively few people in our community who reject the SENS approach to life extension. Almost everyone is open to it,
Yeah,
um, but there's
that's the
very few
low-hanging
people.
fruit. That's the
Yeah,
understandable
yeah,
stuff.
it's
That's
a
the
more
easy
proven
to.
concept. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's something that exists in prototype form, which I agree. In the course of this conversation, you echoed this kind of sentiment. We should mostly, as transhumanists, be talking about things that exist in prototype form. And we should be
yes.
talking about the medical interventions that you could actually tell your a great aunt about and say, "Hey, this might help you
If you can make
be
a Hollywood,
well for a little bit longer." Yeah.
if you can make an intelligible, understandable Hollywood movie out of it, like with a fair budget, then you should talk about it. If you cannot make a movie out of it, stay away from the topic. That's my general idea.
My question was this: are there any barriers to in your thinking to for yourself personally? That is, in the concepts of digital immortality. Like I know a lot of people in this community who are very much for the SENS approach, and when you get into some of these other things that come into collectivist experiences. Or just experiences that may not describe qualia as we understand it. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
I had a few ideas, and I had like a long-standing discussion with Philippe van Nedervelde over like I'm a what you call a transhumanist conservative. So I want to have a biological body as long as possible because I really appreciate this experience as it is. It is for me, it's authentic, and I'm very suspicious of introducing whole new substrata of qualia or experience or reality. An example I had in one of us, that crappy short story I made, is that we could have cyberspaces with totally new experiences. I think that there was a novel about this, Permutation City. Permutation City had different, the cyberspace in the story had different components of reality, more easily manipulable or flexible components. So you had like a molecule called neutromere or something like that, which the feeding molecule, and you had a whole bunch of new elements. And the idea of this is that you can create substrata in cyberspace that are so much more richer than anything reality, physical material reality can match. Is that you can have like 17 primary colors, and you can have a whole cognitive new layers of stacking information, which you can never do in reality. You can have new smells, new senses, several limbs, all sort of. So you create a sort of a super fantasy reality, is where the mind, which you slowly evolve in that subspace or in that cyberspace environment, becomes so specialized to that medium that you never can go back. It becomes a trap. It becomes an existential trap. You understand? It's like you would go back and being half blind, mute, deaf, and stupid in physical reality. That's not acceptable. That's that. If you create realities that are so alien that people can back away from them, it's sort of like heroin.
Yes, it's very much in keeping with what we described before of something going viral, where people are going down a psychopathic rabbit hole, like the incels that we described.
But it doesn't have to always be so destructive. It
doesn't have to be dark.
But there might be situations where you can no longer meaningfully communicate with these people, and you cannot determine if they have a more successful strategy in existence than we. Yeah. It might be that material reality is a dead end. I don't know.
People looking at Neuralace as something that's that is available to ordinarily abled people or to any sentient creature. Some of them do regard this as a precursor with similarly potentially disruptive or weird effects.
Guaranteed. Neuralace, if it's going to work, which I have my doubts, but if it's going to work, it's definitely going to produce really weird, unpredictable, unknown effects. But
medically it works. What doesn't work?
I think
maybe medically it doesn't.
I know with the chip, they put a chip in a cat's anterior brain, and they read the information, and they could decipher the visual perception of the cat. So the cat saw a human, and then it was recognizable as a silhouette of a human, but with slight cat-like features. So the optic nerve projected cat-like features, and you could see it in the cat image, which was taken from the interior part of a cat's brain. My mind was definitely blown. I would never have thought this possible like 8 years ago. Who knows what's possible right now? Who knows what's still happening in labs, secret government labs? The government is really heavily exploring this skill embedding. How does that work? I have no understanding of this. But that means that you cannot really meaningfully talk about it. If we don't know the variables and the parameters, you can make no plastic model of the thing you propose. Try writing a story about it, or even worse, try making a science fiction movie about it. You end up with metaphors like the movie, what do you call it? Minority Report. Cyberspace is doing this with your hands all the time. Because that somehow makes sense to a viewer. It becomes a game, it becomes something recognizable. That metaphor, of course, evolves really quickly these days and age, but that also means that an enormous amount of people in society has no clue what the hell you're talking about, even if there's good movies about it. My mom completely didn't understand. Name a movie? Star Wars? She had no idea what was happening. She only saw like light impressions. There's no story. There was no meaningful story. They didn't recognize the character scene from scene. It was just a jumble for her.
Yeah, we can imagine we won't have the culture. We couldn't possibly have the cultural touchstones to anticipate any number of things that might just be a few short years away. You know, in thinking about, you know, I remember my sister is a biologist, and I remember talking about theorizing about something rather like CRISPR when we were both in university. And even though she had an awful lot more biology understanding than I did, she said that this was an extremely stupid idea. And you know, there's
why?
You know, I don't recollect the full particulars of the conversation. It was tending to be more conversation about some pure bioengineering undertaking. So creating a new.
Did she mean that it was a stupid idea that was dangerous, or a stupid idea that it was never going to work, or?
She meant that it would remain infeasible, that it would never work.
Well, it works. It's being applied right now.
Yeah. And same thing with any 100 things that will derive from advanced algorithms that we're not seeing coming yet. Same thing from brain-computer interfaces, and it is a problem. You know, Ray Kurzweil says that the singularity is 1,000 years of history happening in a year. Yeah. And I'm of a mind that there's a certain kind of logical fallacy in worrying about this too much, because it gets into a kind of gestalt fallacy, an idea that you know, if systems are elegant enough to create such things, then advanced algorithms may be elegant enough to manage them. Exactly. As my feeling. Yeah.
Exactly. But you also get spaghettification of society, of what we have. So there will be shit left behind, completely muttering angrily about what these kids are doing these days. And there will be I spent a while in philosophy, and I was the worst student you can imagine for philosophy. And there was a professor, a Swedish professor, I can't remember his name. He taught himself Dutch in 2 weekends.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty impressive.
How the hell do you do that? Literally, he was like 1 week, he couldn't talk a word of Dutch, like a few words. And like 2 weekends later, like I was walking by him in the hall, I said, good day in English. And he said, he made it clear.
The only way that could possibly happen is if he had such an understanding of so many closely related languages.
But still, a language from scratch in something like 2 weeks. Yeah, that's pretty alien for me. That is, and that was like a few years ago. That doesn't.
Yeah. Well, that's just one of the selling points of Neuralace, is the ability, again, rather speculative, but the ability to engage skills in this way rather than traditional learning. Something a little more of a downloading in real time.
I know Kung Fu, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Johnny Mnemonic.
Yeah, no. Matrix, come on. Yeah, that would be great. And I would definitely select a few very unorthodox skills.
Yeah. It's all trying to imagine, you know, that 1,000 years in a year. It is when people say that this is the end of history, and in reference to something like this, it gets hard to refute that.
No, it's when you're in it, you don't notice anything. The only thing you notice is that, Jesus Christ, last week people were so stupid.
Yeah.
Or
just like there used to be a few hundred more people, and they just all left for the moon. And we're not quite sure how that happened, but they're gone.
Or a bunch of AIs that basically were our in what is the movie Her? They also leave. But that's the cop-out. That's the cop-out. That's the easy solution. It becomes too difficult for the storyline. Well, we let them transcend. That's bullshit.
Well,
that's bullshit.
It's also the
AIs
bullshit.
Want to disrupt everything.
It's also the Star Trek bullshit of the Prime Directive, right? Like that. If any simple dissection of that philosophy, you realize that it's just complete nonsense.
Narrative narrative simplification because the writers can't hook themselves over a few hurdles. So it's like the moment when science fiction writers say there is a whole bunch of technologies which are awesome to explore because you can describe them in meaningful terms and you can use all these metaphors to describe them. But there are a whole bunch of technologies like artificial intelligence where you should stay the hell away and you immediately declare a Butlerian jihad as a story device not to use them. And you see them all over the place. But as soon as we went over the 1990s, and a whole bunch of science fiction writers that actually started dealing with these things. And Accelerando was a good one. And Verne Vinci was amazing. And they started realizing you can actually write about these things. And even then, there was Larry Niven that still in his later stories said, yeah, well, AIs get crazy or they lose interest or whatever happens, story construct, to make sure that you don't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
But that's the unknown unknowns. That's the stuff beyond here are dragons.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I love dragons. As long as they don't breed on me.
Yeah. Well, Ben Goertzel talks about this stuff in terms of like these bio-Luddites and future paleoconservatives living on a preserve, and they have a pretty happy life. They can live forever. They have whatever they have whatever they want. They're little squirrels in the park doing everything that they want to do. But as long as they don't run out into the road where the big machines are.
But think about it. If you are a loving human being, if you're a caring human being, right now, you and me and everyone probably is empathically inclined. We already touched upon one example of someone who is not. You would want to protect those people like children. You would want to take care of them. You would want them to have a comfortable and pleasant life. Like you want to have your cats to be happy and lie in the sun and purr. That is caring about other beings and being empathic about their experience of reality. And that is the most beautiful thing I can imagine, is me being a transhumanism and managing a whole bunch of Mormons. I have like a dossier of Mormons, like 250 Mormons or Amish, literally like a parish in sort of an enclosed dome-like environment. Yes. And I introduce little life game stimuli according to algorithms. And as time progresses, it becomes totally automated. So at some point, I'd leave the Amish reservation alone for 2 weeks. I've got it all covered. The algorithms got all the parameters enclosed, and they would have thousands of years of complete and utter joy and happiness. That's so sweet an idea. And if they want to get out, like one of those Amish kids says, herumspringen, I want to explore reality as it really is, and he goes out of the reservation and he goes to the asteroid belt and becomes a real citizen. Maybe that's the future of humanity, is that we find out that we cannot create full-fledged moral super beings from scratch. So we first have to generate humans, and then we have to let humans live for, like, say, 75 or 35 or whatever years. And then they realize what morality and consequences is. If they don't, we leave them in the reservation, or in dark romantic parties or whatever you want to call them. But they stay in an enclosed, sort of contained environment. And then when they are moral and nice and they have social graces and have a modicum of skills, then we can literally allow them to level up. Very angelic idea.
I think eventually all my questions seem to devolve into simulation theory. But one prevalent simulation theory notion is rather like what you just described. So Ben Zion is actually, or Khannea, whomever is maybe the solipsistic personality in this simulation. Is actually rather like that artificially stupid Amish person. And they're being fed a breadcrumb trail to see if they will make their way out into the greater world of knowledge and experience.
That's Gnosticism. I would love that. I would love that challenge. It might be already the case, but that's of course silly. But yeah, by that token, you might already be in that state if, like, you have been proven moral, and upon the moment of your demise, demise is contrived in your life. So you suffer an airplane accident is actually a sort of a narrative plot line to take you out of the loop, and then you wake up in sort of like a paradise in front of the gates of transcendence. And a sort of a Saint Peter-like figure says, we made up a tally and you have been found suitable, and we've taken you from the matrix, and now what is your choice?
Some people say that unreality, that sense of unreality going viral, a lot of people believing that they are in a simulation would be dangerous to society. Other people say it would make no difference.
Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise.
Yeah. What's that again? Oh yeah, Vanilla Sky. Yeah. Like people have God belief, or don't have God belief, and they're still able to sort of function in the world. They don't completely go nuts. I feel like that unreality isn't quite as a dangerous a thing as people imagine it is. Like, I think it's just like, if people started to be convinced that they were in a simulation, they would still be just going about their business. But it is.
What difference does it make?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It makes no meaningful difference. If you are embedded in the simulation, let's just stick with it.
Yeah.
Cope with your provisions, play by the rules where you are embedded in. If you want to escape, there's always this way to escape, but it's all fear of death, of course. Yeah. All this is all projected fear of death. People cannot function thinking, I am going to be not 50 years from now. There's going to be not, and that doesn't compute in your brain. So then you automatically revert to plastic models of perpetuity or whatever.
Yeah. We all want to have that magical thinking about continuity of ourselves.
Yeah, and only the elves get to board a boat and go to the Western lands, but the rest of humanity still dies.
Yes. Yes. I always hate getting going too much into the simulation stuff, but like you said, what's the point of it? Like, somebody will want to beat the game. Like, that would be the knowing what the game was and being able to beat it. Like, that would be the only difference. Yeah.
Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
He was still part of the establishment at the end. Huh? You realize that it was controlled resistance. It was like a mediated Facebook style with likes and dislikes resistance. Mac resistance. That was the story of the Matrix. You cannot escape it, and he found a way to escape. If you can't beat them, you join them. That's what he did.
Yeah, those films got worse with each passing film. I wonder if the fourth one will be the worst still.
A lot of people. I think that the two sequels were pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
They were.
I thought they had just increasingly more plot holes.
They were of course there were plot holes, but I found that they were maybe a little hastily made. But I think they're still good movies. Actually, I liked Matrix 2 and 3 a lot. Actually.
Yeah. Maybe I'll go back and watch them again and give them another chance.
Aside from the visuals, but a friend of mine, someone I know from Amsterdam. Club Hell, you remember that club?
Okay.
The SM space.
Okay, yeah, I do.
Yeah, a little bit. A guy in Amsterdam who's like a really famous vampire BDSM guy. I don't know if he's still there. Crudelia. He organized that scene. Yeah,
that's pretty awesome.
I was like a few decades back involved with Amsterdam Satanists. A bunch of crazy people. I had a lot of fun with them, and he was there all the time. Cordelia, interesting guy.
Yeah, I mean, my experience of Satanists has been that they are At least the ones in the most sort of mainstream tradition are quite sane.
The Temple of Satan is hilarious, but the LaVey
Yeah,
Satanism,
the LaVeyan Satanists are
that libertarians on crack. It's like the worst possible Ayn Rand philosophy. Take the worst interpretation of Ayn Rand, and that's the Satanism of LaVey.
Yeah. That's something that Rachel Haywire in an interview some weeks back professed that she was a Satanist. She just tries everything on for size and sees if it'll get drive a few clicks. But
you want me to get a migraine? Oh.
Sorry. And look, I was trying to end on a high note. I apologize.
I agree that everything she does fits in this leitmotif. I should shut the fuck up about her.
Yeah, so should I. I'm that my campaign advisors, such as I have them, have been telling me this for some weeks now. Yeah.
No, I think it's a moral thing to gossip about some people, and this is a clear-cut case of you can like really seriously warn people if you're convinced to that degree that this is wrong, what's happening, and what's been happening for at least 10 or more years is wrong.
Yeah. She keeps getting a clean slate, and people don't know this stuff about her, and then she runs wild on them, and everybody acts surprised. It's
yeah, and she is probably very surprised how I describe her now, because we parted as sort of friends in 2011, but slowly after I started realizing what toxic influence she exerted.
Well, I do believe that everyone has a potential for growth, and step away from the ledge of personality disorder is not an easy thing to do. But maybe she'll grow as a human being in time.
It's not for me to judge. I hope she stays out of trouble, and I only hope that she does not get other people in trouble. But I'm enough of a penderist to appreciate her for what she is. A source of chaos, a source of unrest, a testing ground, to sort of a hammer by which you measure other things. And in that, she has great value. And if she breaks transhumanism, then transhumanism doesn't deserve to survive. It is the perfect what do you call a chaos monkey?
Yeah.
A chaos monkey is a sort of software testing trick to see if something operates. It's creating intentional chaos in a system to test it. That's perfect, perfectly suited.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you suggested that she had given someone drugs against their will. She's insinuated political violence to some degree a few times that I'm aware of. I know 100 people who've insinuated political violence, but
I haven't been following her for years. Yeah,
the test monkey. I mean, I don't want to be around a test monkey that's actually doing dangerous things. Wow. It's good to have some diversity.
As long as some people warn how dangerous the whole phenomenon is. There are a lot of people right now that are like very aware. Well, if someone like Natasha Vita-Moore calls me in a state of deep emotional distress, 2013 or 2012, that's a long time ago. And I think that a lot of people are well aware of it. If I say to someone like James Hughes, and again, I'm gossiping, Rachel Haywire, you see emotional, visceral response in many people. So I think the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah. And the biggest thing for me, and this is also, I kind of have her stink on me now from getting into the trench a little bit with her.
I shared a bed with her. Imagine how long that stank.
Yeah, but at the same time, if she wasn't in this race, if she hadn't been in this race, I would have had a 1% chance of winning it, and now I have something a little higher than that, but I don't know what. But so I can't complain too much.
Is this fun? That's the question I ask you. Is all of this what you experience? If you look back on the whole struggle, transhumanist party, there's two meanings. Does it have meaning, and is it fun?
It definitely has meaning. It's definitely chewing in my ability to sleep at regular hours. that's as much to do with calling a lot of people in different countries as anything. But and also just bad habits on my part. It is the stress of it. But aside from that, it's been incredibly illuminating and quite enjoyable. But yeah, Rachel Hayward is a relatively small part of this experience, really. It's been an
I am
incredible thing to do.
perplexed in that I still hear her name right now. I seriously, if you would have taken a bet with me in 2011 when I interacted with her in Minneapolis, I would have bet, she's going to live for a year or 2 years, and then she's dead. And she's still around and still causing chaos. You have to admire it at some level.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I hope she doesn't break too many more eggs, because she's broken a few already. But yeah, I guess you do have to admire it.
There is I am not interested because there's a whole continent, there's a whole ocean between me and that whole phenomenon. So I can safely say what I experienced, and I am going to has been a great interview, but I'm like falling over, keeling over. My eyes. I'm burning.
I apologize. I usually try to keep these things to 90 minutes at most. Khannea Sun Tzu, thank you for doing this. And you know what? You also, aside from giving me so much to think about, you give me maybe a little something that I can use as campaign strategy. So thank you for that as well.
Wow. If you need anyone interesting or anyone I might know, give them my regards.
I will. Likewise. Yes. Thank you, Khannea.
Thank you so much. It was good for my ego.
All right. Well, I really did have a blast with this. Enjoy the rest of your week.